Finding and using angles when you're building things. When I'm building something and I need to figure out angles, there's a variety of tools at my disposal, and I'd like to show you those that I most commonly use. This is basically a protractor with a straight edge attached to it, and I use this more in my drawing and drafting of ideas than I do actually in the shop because it is so thin, but I keep it in my layout box. This super ruler thing is a combination square, which doesn't look like much, but besides being a very good measuring tool because it's far more robust and durable than a tape measure, is how you can set yourself up for a perfect 90-degree angle or a 45-degree angle, and that's scribing a 45 line, or you can take this body part off of the ruler and actually set it down if you need to like tip something into a 45-degree angle and use it as a right angle form, like if you're setting the blade on a table saw. You can measure the end of a part, lock it into place, and then be able to transfer that mark to a bunch of other parts. And if you're good, you can also slide it along the length of a long part while you hold your scribe or your fine tip marker or pencil along the length of it, like I do with a speed square. This one's pretty beat up on my bench, but it's fine for what I do when I build in here. But I do have a couple of nicer ones in my layout box that have built-in levels that aren't all beat up. These assist with keeping a part perfectly vertical if you keep the bubble in between the lines, and this one is fancy. It's got a built-in scribe at the top. I can't talk about bubbles keeping angles without giving a shout out to my torpedo levels. They've got a vertical, a horizontal, and a 45, and if they're not too beat up and they don't have chips in their magnets, they can stick to your project and help you hold pieces in place. Really, really handy to have sitting on a project while you're welding, because the heat you apply can move the pieces that you've tacked initially out of place and out of angle. This is a little smaller magnetic one. I have a handful of these that I can put on a job in case there are multiple areas that are going to be moving while I'm working on them. There's also this big guy for long jobs, and it gets treated more gently than literally anything else in the shop. This thing is not a bubble level, but it works in a similar way. I'm pretty sure this is a weighted needle within a dial that's marked with all of the degrees and quadrants, 0 to 90, and one side's got a magnet, the other side has a V-groove, I assume, so it doesn't roll off of tubing, and these are great to have as you're working just for a real quick check, slap it up there. You can see if you're still holding your angle or if you have to hammer your angle back into place. Just remember to take this off before you hammer because the magnet's not that strong and they go flying. It moves fairly smoothly and they're quite accurate, but it only works in the vertical position because once the needle is held horizontally, it loses all of its function. This sweet little thing is a digital angle gauge, which works fairly identical to the analog dial gauge, except it has this beautiful display and just is so easy to use. It is also magnetic. It also has the groove all the way around it. It can be used in the vertical or horizontal position. You just want to be careful with the 0 button because although it's extremely handy for finding complementary angles, you also want to be absolutely certain that the reference angle that you were using when building is the one that you intend to use, usually a flat 0 surface or one at a vertical 90. So you want to also take this off your piece before you hammer it back into place where it needs to be. This is an angle finder, which does exactly as the name describes. It finds angles for you. Brilliant for transferring angles from one place to another. So for example, if I needed to cut a piece of wood to fit into my ancient house that is not square anywhere, I could set this into any internal or external angle, lock it, and then bring it over and draw lines that I need to match it. And this even works well, I found, with a customer supplied drawing. If someone wants something to look exactly so as they've drawn on the paper, I can lie my angle finder down on their concept and then transfer it into real life. And again, it's got the bubble level to hold a level horizontal, so you could use this as a right angle tool if you wanted to, or you could drag it off 90 or a 270, and it's also marked with a ruler. A step up from this angle finder is the digital angle finder that does all of the math for you. You can 0 it and then measure an angle simply by lining up the lines on your rulers to a drawing or to the physical piece and then transfer it like the previous one. Or more importantly, if you need the complement of this angle, this one here, to complete the 180, you just subtract this number from the 180 and you've got the complement. Then you can 0 them anywhere so that when you move it to a new position, it measures that angle. Also, some of them have a little tab up here, I think, for mitering, which will cut whatever angle it is you're measuring exactly in half so that you can cut two pieces like when you're joining in a corner. The digital angle finder is quite a bit more accurate than the analog one. and a protractor, so you can use these to double check the preset guides on your chop saw. This thing is handy for angles on tubing and pipe. I really don't use it much anymore since I don't build boilers anymore, but you can loosen the center screw and adjust the measuring indicator line to the angle at which you need to mark, and then you rotate the tool until the bubble is between the lines, and then give it a punch, and now you've got a mark directly at the angle off of 90 that you needed. Pay very close attention to your blueprint so you know where you're referencing. These are really neat, but I also found them to be a tad inaccurate. There's also a pipe wrap that you can wrap around a pipe and tubing to cut angles. I don't care to get into it, but I mostly use it in case I need to draw a line all the way around an item and maybe measure my marks after I've done the circumference math. I could go into a little more detail about this, but it's a lot and also boring. There are lots of other kinds of rulers and angle finding tools and dial indicators and things I don't necessarily use here or am familiar with, but this is a handful of what I use here fairly regularly in the shop.